Are you part of the great resignation, that mass exodus of people who are leaving their jobs to start something new? Then something you need to consider is what to do with your company 401k. Rather than just rolling it over, consider opening a truly self-directed IRA. With a self-directed IRA, a truly self-directed IRA, your retirement portfolio can include real estate, precious metals, cryptocurrency, notes, loans, a new business, and traditional equities like stocks and bonds. You can make any investment the law allows with a truly self-directed retirement account. Listen, you probably have questions, so why not take the time to get the answers? Start with going to IRAadvantage.com. Then talk to the truly self-directed IRA professionals at IRA Advantage.
Would you like to learn more about truly self-directed IRAs? Then visit IRAadvantage.com, view our videos, and call IRA Advantage. Let us set up a truly self-directed IRA for you. That's IRAadvantage.com.
Can you give any more details on where the Secret Service found the cocaine in the West Wing and how it got there?
So, as you know, this is under the purview of the Secret Service. But one thing that I can share, that I'll share a little bit more information. As you know, the President and the First Lady and their family were not here this weekend, as you all reported on this. And as you also know, that they left on Friday and returned just yesterday.
That is Karine Jean-Pierre, and boy, is she earning her paycheck this week. She's having to explain, but what about the cocaine they found in the West Wing of the White House? And as usual, I've been to the West Wing of the White House on just a couple of occasions. I've been to the rest of the White House maybe a dozen times, but there are places in the White House I've never been, and I'm not talking about the Situation Room. I'm talking about places that are so off limits. Well, guess what Karine Jean-Pierre tried to do in that soundbite? She tried to say, well, the first family was not here. They were off at Camp David for the holiday weekend, and then they came back just yesterday. So in other words, it probably wasn't them. I think almost anybody with a brain right now understands it was Hunter Biden's stash of cocaine that the Secret Service found in the West Wing of the White House, but not just the West Wing. And here's where it gets interesting, because I know one thing. Not just having visited the White House, but if you watch politics over the last 50 years in America, when it comes to scandals, the cover is always worse than the crime. The cover-up always makes it worse. And the Biden crime family, well, they're playing by that same stupid script, trying to cover up for the ne'er-do-well, addicted son of a Joe. And that would be Hunter Biden, because everybody who's gotten anywhere near any kind of mainstream media or off-brand media understands Hunter Biden is a cocaine addict. He also likes prostitutes, although didn't find any prostitutes at the White House. But here's where it gets interesting, because new developments came out just in the last couple of hours. And what it is that the official first story, the story that KJP, Karine Jean-Pierre, was, she had to stand out there at the podium and offer up this story saying, well, it was in a highly trafficked area of the West Wing. Well, first of all, the West Wing is a place that to get into it, there is incredible security, background checks, the whole 9 yards. And if you've got any bags or anything else, you think the airport is tough, the West Wing of the White House is especially tough, and you expect it to be. Now, there are reporters who go in and out. They go to the briefing room. They go to the press areas. Occasionally, they even go into the West Wing of the White House. But here's what happened. The initial reports that came out after the discovery of the cocaine over the Independence Day weekend, and of course, they knew at the White House who everybody was going to assume that cocaine came in with, that it came in with Hunter Biden. It was the most logical explanation. And so far, they don't want to talk about it. So what did they do? They put out an initial report saying it was found in a locker in a West Wing lobby where tour guests sometimes leave their personal belongings, like their bag or their cell phone. The problem is today, NBC News, and I'll give them full credit for this, they broke the news the cocaine was not found in a locker in the West Wing lobby. It was actually discovered by the Secret Service in an area that's between the West Executive Foyer, I've been in there, and a lower level lobby. Never been there. It's one floor below the main West Wing offices. It is the place where occasionally they park the vice president's SUV or his limousine. They park those executive vehicles there. And so Karine Jean-Pierre is out there saying, well, this is a place, has a lot of people going through it, all kinds of people all day long. And I mean, she must be tempted to say, and it's not Hunter. It's not Hunter, because if it's Hunter, I'm going to have to stand out here and be basically beat on like a piñata by the reporters in that room who are going to say, wasn't this Hunter Biden? I mean, just yesterday, Karine Jean-Pierre was asked, well, if you find the person who brought cocaine into the White House, are you going to insist that they be prosecuted? And there's the problem for Hunter, because Hunter just finished pleading guilty to tax crimes, and they were federal crimes, not violations, as some media like CBS says. They were federal tax crimes. And he also pled guilty to a gun crime, where he illegally bought a gun, illegally possessed a gun. And after all, his dad is Joe Biden. He's the guy who's constantly telling us we can't let guns into the hands of criminals and drug addicts. Well, how about your son, Mr. President? So she's out there spinning this story saying, oh, yeah, it was found someplace where they have lots and lots of people. Except now it was found someplace entirely different. And while some in the White House very quickly yesterday predicted we'll never find out who actually brought the blow to the White House, no, now the Secret Service says we are bound and determined we will find it. And the U.S. Secret Service has confirmed the substance found was chemically tested, turns out to be cocaine, brought in by somebody who either works there or had authorization to be there. Now, that could be a tourist, but it probably is Hunter Biden. And Anthony Gigliemi, who's chief of communications for the Secret Service, says, we are going to do our best to identify who may have brought it in. Fact is that I've heard in the last 24 hours from people who say, Lars, I used to work at a casino. Nothing happened in that place without it ending up on camera and on video. And Mr. Gigliani says the place where the drug was found is closed to the public. He says, sometimes during the screening process, people will leave things behind. Somebody left their cocaine behind. Who do you suppose that might be? He says there were very robust screening efforts to identify potential hazards. So now the Joe Biden White House is in the middle of a cover-up. Now, I've heard from people who say, well, this is just supposed to be a distraction from everything else that's happening in the Biden White House. I don't know if you could distract. I mean, we've got about 40 different distractions. We've got a war in Ukraine that's chewing up hundreds of billions of dollars. We've got inflation that's still out of control. We've got gasoline prices that are still high. We've got an economy that may or may not be headed into recession. And of course, you've got criminal investigation of the president's son, and now whistleblowers of the IRS who say we were told not to go anywhere near Joe Biden because some of the investigatory trails from Hunter Biden lead right back to Joe. And they were told, don't go there. Don't investigate that. And now we've got yet another cover-up of yet another crime. And we've got a White House that's trying to deny it and say, no, look the other way. Nothing to see here, folks. I don't think it's going to work. I think they're in trouble at this point. And they understand, and this may be a little bit of a distraction from the fact that Hunter Biden's tax crimes relate directly to the millions and millions of dollars he received from Ukraine and from Beijing, and where he complained in those emails on that laptop. Remember the laptop that the Obama-Biden administration and the FBI and the DOJ said, that's just Russian nonsense. It's Russian misinformation. And then it turned out that was a big fat lie. Like I said, the cover-up always ends up being worse than the crime itself. I mean, maybe Joe Biden should step out to the microphones and say, look, I'm ashamed to admit it, but the guy I've called the smartest guy I know is a drug addict. And he may be the smartest guy I know only because he's figured out how to make millions of dollars off my name. Now, if Joe Biden came out and said maybe you could show a little sympathy toward a dad with an addict son. I mean, there are plenty of dads in America, sad to say, who have addicted sons and daughters. Have a little sympathy for him. But no, I think Biden is going to follow the same old script. Cover up, cover up, cover up, until it's time to kick him to the curb and install cackling Kamala as the president of the United States. Back in a moment. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network.
That makes a lot of sense, a lot of nonsense.
Right, you're bloody well right. You know you got a right to say This is the Northwest Nonsense.
How much longer do we have to sit for this nonsense?
That great moment every day where Lars brings you the cold, hard facts without any liberal wokeness from the Daily Dead, fish wrapper, or mainstream media bias.
Even the most fervent promoters of transgenderism for children now predict a disaster is on its way to the Pacific Northwest states. Remember, lawmakers in both Oregon and Washington passed legislation protecting government workers who direct children to medical treatment, including drugs and surgery for boys and girls who want to change their gender. Parents have no say under these new laws, only state employees, teachers, and social workers. Now, if they had any morals at all, they would say, I want no part of medical treatment for children under age without their parents' knowledge. If teachers and social workers participate in this or simply turn a blind eye, then they have only themselves to be ashamed of. The states offered themselves up as sanctuaries for children who want to run away from disapproving parents and get their chemical castration and their puberty blockers paid for by taxpayers here in Oregon and Washington. Willamette Week's headline this week predicts Portland is unprepared for the wave of transgender kids who are going to arrive without housing. The article goes on to say that, of course, some of them will be young adults, but others will be kids with a backpack and no place to stay. Now, do you think that some of the drug addicts and the convicted sex offenders who live somewhat anonymously in the region's hundreds and hundreds of homeless camps will welcome in those children? I'd be willing to bet they do. They will. Does Hunter Biden smoke crack? So even as we hear daily warnings about the multi-billion-dollar child sex trafficking business, Oregon and Washington are inviting unaccompanied, sexually confused kids to come here and hide from their parents with no housing and no resources. What could possibly go wrong? Today's question of the day comes in from Cheryl McCormick. Lars, met a woman on July 4th. She said she immigrated as a 9-year-old with her parents. I'm guessing that was about 40 years ago. She has a green card. She's married. She had 2 children, works and pays her taxes. Doesn't want to become a citizen to pay homage to her mother and her place of birth, Croatia. She receives a ballot from the state of Washington in every election. Not a citizen, but a legal resident. This is the ploy of blue states to pack the ballot box. We never learn about this. Where is the Secretary of State? Where is the election board? This is very wrong. I'm sure it's unconstitutional. Lars, sound the alarm. Thank you, Cheryl McCormick. Well, Cheryl, with your help, that's exactly what I do every single day. And now today's Daily Grill.
Insane.
Are you completely insane?
Ridiculous.
They get more and more ridiculous.
Flat out dumb.
You're even dumber than I thought.
Who deserves today's Lars Grill of the Day?
Maybe they're just really, really stupid.
Presented by Better Basements and Waterproofing. Water in your crawl space or basement? Call Better Basements and Waterproofing.
As I just mentioned a moment ago, both of the states of Oregon and Washington have effectively legalized hard drugs. It happened in Washington state thanks to the Supreme Court, and the legislature did next to nothing. They passed a misdemeanor, a gross misdemeanor for having hard drugs. In Oregon, it was the voters who did it, and again, the legislature does next to nothing. And as a result, drug addiction has gone up dramatically in both states, and you can measure it based on the number of drug overdose deaths. But it's not just overdoses and deaths. It's also the things people have to do to get the money to supply that drug habit. Consider this story today. A copper thief has caused so much damage by trying to strip away the metal at a library in Renton, the Fairwood Library, that the library is now closed indefinitely as they search for the parts necessary to get the HVAC system running again. In other words, he went in and stole all the copper piping. The copper refrigerant lines were yanked out of the equipment. That left the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system inoperable. I looked it up. Number 1 copper scrap in Seattle sells for $3.33 a pound. Now, I don't know how many pounds of copper pipe you'd find in the average HVAC system, say in a library. Let's say it's 50 pounds, for example. So for $150 for that scrap metal in the pocket of a drug addict, the entire library is shut down indefinitely, and I would guess the damage to the HVAC system probably in the thousands, might even be the tens of thousands of dollars, and the neighborhood doesn't have any use of the library, a public resource. And by the way, Como TV quotes a maintenance person with the King County Library System who was outside the closed building on Wednesday. He said he expects it will take 3 to 4 months before all that HVAC equipment could be restored. All of that because the states have chosen to make hard drugs effectively legal and up for sale, and people buy them and people take them and people have to pay for them, and that's how they pay for them. And then you step down the police force, step down the prosecution, stop sending people to jail, and what happens? You put an entire library out of operation and thousands or tens of thousands of dollars of damages are done. If you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it happens right here every day on the Radio Northwest Network. If you want to dial in, it's 866-HEY-LARS. And if you're a naysayer, you go right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@LarsLarson.com. I'll get to the Twitter poll here in just a moment. Larry Mann writes in, "Hey, Lars, I've worked in casinos for more than 20 years doing surveillance. I find it appalling that an investigation in what should be the simple lost item bag of cocaine would take more than an hour. Assuming the White House has even a mid-grade camera system, especially in the public areas, a review of this kind should take about 10 minutes. They know exactly whose cocaine was 10 minutes after it was found." Signed, Larry Mann. Now, to your calls. Let's go to Jeff in Everett. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the Lars Larson Show on Conspiracy Theory Thursday. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Lars, you missed a big part of that story about the copper thieves in the library.
Well, fill me in.
All that Freon was released into the atmosphere, and our wonderful governor, Jay Inslee, he's outlawed the sale of that Freon to the public. Like if your car AC system goes bad, you can't buy that at the auto parts store anymore because he deems him and the attorney general has deemed it dangerous. So not only are they stealing copper, but they're polluting the atmosphere.
There, and by the way, Jeff, I recall it used to be Freon, then they went to something, FM3 or something like that, and that was there. And then a few years ago, I was talking to a guy in the HVAC business. I said, "Do they still use that?" He goes, "Oh, no, that's the old stuff. They've now decided that that's bad, just like Freon, so now they use something else entirely." So I think you're absolutely right. Well, that guy released all that Freon into the atmosphere and damaged planet Earth. Jeff, thanks for the call from Everett, and thanks for listening on KVI. Hey, Ray and Eugene, thanks for listening on KPNW. What's on your mind?
Hey, Lars, thanks for taking my phone call.
Sure.
I'm a long-haul truck driver now. I travel all across our great nation. But I used to be a performing drug addict, you might say. I'm in recovery now. I've been in recovery for quite a while, and I'm thankful
Congrats.
for it.
That's an accomplishment. You know, it's tough to do.
It is tough to do. I dread coming back to Oregon and Washington anymore. I'm out on the road for a couple of weeks at a time. And when I come back, I just see it falling apart, and it's all drugs. It really is. You know, back in those days, the only thing that might have got me clean at the time or kept me from going over the edge was either the idea that they had us surrounded or maybe they really did, you know. And I know people that are still doing it these days, and they just don't care. They just don't care anymore. It's destroying us out here.
I think you're absolutely right, Ray. It's destroying not just the addicts, but the communities around them who don't take drugs. Stay safe out there. You got the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you on a Conspiracy Theory Thursday. One of my favorite people to talk to is Jay Cho, Jonathan Cho, who is one of the best journalists in the Pacific Northwest by my estimation, and he writes great stuff all the time. So I saw a couple of pieces he put up about this new $20 million hotel that the folks in King County are going to fill full of drug addicts, and I thought we got to get Jay Cho on to talk about it. Jonathan, welcome back.
Hey, Lars, thanks for having me.
So would you mind telling my audience about the former Lacey Days Inn Motel?
Yeah, so this was a motel that was actually being used by the public up until recently when the state essentially used $20 million to purchase it to house some of the most problematic homeless people who are essentially living on Interstate 5. Causing a lot of issues, fires, thefts in the area, as well as the ongoing open-air drug use. So there's now concern all of those problems are being essentially warehoused in this hotel and will eventually spill out into the rest of the community.
And why wouldn't they? Because if the people were already living in tents somewhere and you say, but if we give them a place to live, they'll stop stealing or they'll stop doing drugs or they'll stop acting in bizarre and antisocial ways, that theory doesn't really hold water, does it?
Yeah, Lars, you hit it right on the head. And look, we want the best outcome. We want this all to work. If this succeeds, it's what's best for the community. Results at other homeless hotels that have been set up in this manner just prove that it's going to have issues. I spoke to Lacey PD yesterday. I spoke to some of the organizers of this event, and they all admit that there are going to be 911 calls, and the vast majority will likely be for health issues. You have some older homeless folks living there, but you're likely going to have the fentanyl ODs as well. But Lacey PD says that they're ready. They're going to be ready for a potential spike in 911 calls, especially for things like fires and thefts and who knows what. And
drug overdoses and things like that. Well, let me ask you this, Jonathan. It's one that when government does something, my usual test for it, both as a journalist and as a talk show host, is say, have you ever done this before and it worked out well? And if they say, well, we've never done it before, but this other community did it, they did this and it worked out well. Show me the working model of it somewhere. And if they're willing to admit, no, it's never been tried before, we're just kind of throwing 20 mil at this thing and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. If they were honest, they'd say that. Do they have another example anywhere in Washington State or anywhere else that they can point to where they say if you take homeless drug addicts and you put them in a motel room at tremendous expense, they turn into productive, working, sober citizens?
Look, Lars, that number, that data, it remains elusive. If all of these success stories actually existed, I think most places would make a promo video and march all these people out in front of the cameras. But notice that doesn't happen that often. Instead, these motels turn into black holes, more taxpayer dollars being thrown into this endless situation, all part of the homeless industrial complex that I've personally seen firsthand and reported on. And here's the key piece that nobody's really talking about. You have that one-time $20+ million cost. But what about all the resources now, the 911 calls that'll be used, the ambulance calls, all of the extra private security that's going to be needed to support this in this community? Nobody wants to talk about that because that's an inconvenient truth.
And by the way, they changed the name on it. I don't know if they thought they probably couldn't use Days Inn anymore, so now they call it Maple Court. But according to your journalism, they will equip Maple Court with 24/7 staff. That's more than even most motels do. You have to wake the person up if you come in the middle of the night. Caseworkers, they're going to put staff out there. When you talk about the cost, it's not just 911. How much are they going to spend per month or per year to hire all this staff to work with these people 24 hours a day?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, and I asked that question. They didn't give me that number. They said that it's still in the early stages. They're still figuring a lot of this out, and that the most important piece is that there's actually a place to house the homeless. And to a certain degree, I agree with that. But at the same time, nobody wants to talk about the extra costs and ultimately the costs such as public safety in the community that nobody knows, yet up to this point. But no doubt, when Lacey PD says that they're preparing for a potential spike in 911 calls, I think that in and of itself is the story.
By the way, I'm talking to Jonathan Cho. The voice you're hearing is a journalist with the Discovery Institute. We're always glad for his insights. I want to ask you about one other thing about this, Jonathan. I mean, you covered drugs and some of the effects on society a lot. You used to have these people scattered up and down I-5 in tents. If you were selling any of the drugs that these people use, isn't Maple Court going to become your number one sales location? You could just set up shop, a few yards away from the front of the former Days Inn, and probably all your customers are gathered there in one place.
Lars, I mean, again, that's just common sense. And I asked that question, what's going to be done about that? And executive director of Lehigh, the Low Income Housing Institute that's going to be running Maple Court now, Sharon Lee, pretty much said, we're going to do our best to identify the bad actors. I don't know what that quite means, but there's no clear-cut plan to keep out the drug dealers who are clearly going to prey on this. Look, their revenue stream just moved from the Hobby Lobby encampment a few minutes away in Olympia, Washington, over to the Lacey Maple Court facility now. Of course the dealers are going to go over there. So, look, as they say, you just have to be vigilant at this point. The neighbors now have to deal with the homeless neighbors, and this situation is not going to be changing anytime soon.
Well, see, and here's the other thing, Jonathan. I noticed in your reporting, I always look at, if I look for the dog that didn't bark. When they say drug use will not be allowed in the public spaces at Maple Court, and you say, that's good. You say, well, but if it's not allowed in the public spaces, then it is allowed in the private spaces. So all they're doing is telling all these addicts, just make sure you shoot up or smoke in your room instead of doing it in the lobby of the former Days Inn.
Yeah, they won't use that language or phrasing, Lars, but that pretty much sums it up. What they'll always say is, "Hey, we can't do anything about what people do behind the scenes."
Yes, you can.
Doors.
Now, hold on, Jonathan. Do you think we should accept that garbage when you say I can't do anything about somebody who's living in housing and is using drugs? Yes, you can. You can say if you're caught using drugs, you're out of the housing. We want the housing to be for the people who are trying to get off drugs. And if you actually had an addict, like the ones that Eric Johnson did in the documentary Seattle is Dying, if you said, I'm trying to get clean and sober, but everybody in every room around me is using drugs and buying drugs and selling drugs, what's the likelihood that somebody who's actually trying to get sober is going to get there?
Yeah, and not only that, a lot of these men and women, they'll be able to leave the facility and roam in the community. And you don't think that they're going to connect or hook up with their dealers or their friends who may drag them back into this lifestyle? Here's the key that still boggles my mind. There are no requirements for any of these residents to get treatment, no requirements to get help. They keep saying only when they're ready. So in the meantime, they get a free apartment with a beautiful bathroom and a bed, but there aren't any requirements. That's what's so stunning to me.
Well, Jonathan, maybe I've mentioned this to you before, but do you know what this is the 10-year anniversary? 2023 is the 10-year anniversary because 10 years ago, a guy by the name of Barack Obama said, we are going to force everybody who takes HUD money from the federal government to go to housing first. And if they don't adopt that policy, we won't give them the federal money they so want. And he said, we will cure this problem in 10 years. He made that prediction in 2013. It's now 2023. Jonathan, have you seen it get any better?
Nope, quite the opposite. It's getting only worse. And that is one of the most dire, I guess, predictions that Obama said it would get better. It hasn't. It's just a sad state of affairs right now. We're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars into this housing first strategy, and it just continues to fail every single day.
You got to check out the journalism of Jonathan Cho. He's Jay Cho on social media. We'll be back in a moment. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. This segment of the show brought to you by NickShivers.com for an instant offer to sell your home immediately. No showing, no hassles, and you pick the closing date. NickShivers.com for details. Now, our Twitter poll today. Should you be able to record a conversation without telling everyone involved in the conversation? Washington and Oregon have different laws. In Oregon, single-party consent is still the law on the phone, but not in person. In other words, if you're in Oregon and you call somebody in Oregon or in another state and you want to record the phone call, as long as there are only two people on the line and you are one of them and you want to record it, you can record it. You don't have to tell them that you're recording. The only person or the only entity that works against is the liar. If somebody lies to you and you record it, and let's say they promise, why, I'll get that job done by next Tuesday. And then next Tuesday, you say you didn't get it done by Tuesday. You said you would. And then the person says, no, I didn't. I never told you I'd get it done by Tuesday. The only person that recording works against is the liar. And I've never had a problem with it. As a reporter, I've used it literally thousands of times to record conversations, but in person. The courts have now decided, the Ninth Circuit Court, which I usually disagree with, in this case says, yes, it is ruled that a law prohibiting the recording of individuals without their explicit consent is unconstitutional as it violates the First Amendment to the federal Constitution. So, should you be able to record a conversation without telling everyone involved about the recording? My answer is yes. You can answer any way you like at Lars Larson Show and at LarsLarson.com. Brought to you by Ultimate Truck Services. If you rely on trucks for business, Ultimate keeps your biggest assets on the road and running right. Find them at UltimateTruckService.com. Let's go to Randy. Hey, Randy, thanks for listening on the Radio Northwest Network. What's on your mind?
I'm glad you're back. Just one thing, and maybe I'm off base. Maybe my lying eyes aren't telling me. Anyway, I heard Multnomah County has over 400 open jobs. Just for fun, I looked at some of the jobs. It seems that almost all of them are geared towards they violate the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I don't understand it.
Are you saying that they are racially biased or gender biased or language biased?
Mostly, no. They promote different languages, but yes, they seem to favor certain classes of people depending on their skin color and according to their sexual preferences. It makes no sense. I don't understand how they can run the city government like this, the county government, why they're not getting their pantsuit off.
You know what, Randy?
Randy, look yourself.
I believe you, because I get people sending these listings, and it doesn't matter if it's King County, Multnomah County, Lane County, whatever. They all do it. And you know why they can get away with it? The same rule you had when you were 16 years old and your friend said, "Can we do this?" And you said, "We can until we get caught." I mean, that was the rule when you were a 16-year-old boy and said, "Can we go 90 miles an hour down the highway?" Well, we can until we get caught. That's their rule. And you know how they get caught? Somebody like you, and I would encourage you to do it. BOLI, Bureau of Labor and Industries in Oregon, Labor and Industries in Washington State, you can file a complaint saying, "I believe there is racial discrimination going on." Now, I guess you could strengthen the case. I don't know what your time commitments are, but if you said, "I'm going to apply for that job, I'm going to make it clear that I'm a white man," and when they reject me, I'm going to say they rejected me because right there in the ad, they said they prefer a person of color. And that is illegal. I agree with you, Randy. I say it on the air all the time. It's unconstitutional under the federal constitution. It's unconstitutional under the state constitution. It is against federal law, state law, and usually local ordinances as well. File the complaint with BOLI and make them investigate it, because that is the only way they get caught. Until somebody calls them on it, then they just ignore it. And that is the way it works. It's complaint driven.
It's fundamentally, morally, and it's irreprehensible. It's racism from the liberal end. And that's one reason I'm calling, is because maybe I know you have millions of listeners. You do such a good job, and maybe
thank you.
Not only me, but some of the others can do the same thing as well.
You could. And Randy, here's the thing. I've said I've got three. Well, I usually have three great employees. We're filling a spot right now, but I have two great producers. If I said, I have a young lady who works for me, I also have a young man who works for me, and if I said, on the next person we hire, I'm going to hire a black female person, and I'm going to make it a point I would be breaking so many laws. I'd be violating the law. I'd get sued blue and tattooed. So I don't do it. It's illegal to do it. But governments think that they have the rules. The rules are for thee and not for me, is the way they look at it. Kind of like the Biden crime family rules, where the rules don't apply to Biden's. As Joe Biden himself has said on Hot Mic, no one blanks with Biden. He used the F word, and I can't use that on the air because that's another federal rule that I can't violate, but I'm sure Hunter Biden could get away with it. But if you did that, if you filed the complaint, Randy, there have been a couple occasions I've called the Urban League. I've called the NAACP because, those groups used to come on the air and talk with me. They don't like to do it anymore. They're cowards. But I've called them up in the past, said, "Hey, we've got a producer opening. If you have any candidates you'd like to suggest, send them over." Now, I can do that legally. That doesn't mean I'm going to hire the first person of color who walks in the door. It means if you're qualified, I don't care what color you are. I don't care who you like to sleep with or what kind of sex you like. I don't even care if you wear women's underwear and you're not a woman. You can work for me. Right. It's your skills and talents, not the color of your skin or what's below your belt buckle. I don't care about that stuff, and government shouldn't either. File that complaint, Randy, and I'll follow it all the way through. You're listening to the Radio Northwest Network. Do you have investment properties you're considering selling and would like to learn how to defer the tax consequences? Then you need to call Equity Advantage and learn about a 1031 exchange. A 1031 exchange is a powerful investment tool. It enables you to keep a property's equity intact when it's used to acquire like-kind replacement property of equal or greater value and equity, even if you recently acquired the property. For over 30 years, Equity Advantage has been providing investors solutions for deferring taxes and maximizing the value of investments through a 1031 exchange. At Equity Advantage, we don't sell investments, but rather provide the tax deferment tools and expertise to facilitate their sale and transfer. Learn more by going to 1031exchange.com. or Google YouTube Equity Advantage for in-depth videos. Listen, you've worked hard for the money in your investments. Equity Advantage works hard to keep it yours.
Learn more about 1031 exchanges and Equity Advantage at 1031exchange.com. That's 1031exchange.com.
Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you. And if anyone ever asks me, Lars, have you ever secretly recorded somebody? I would say, yeah, absolutely. I've done it thousands of times. And then you say, but is that legal? And I say, well, it depends on how you do it. If I'm talking to my friend Josh Marquis on the phone, Josh joins us now, former district attorney, an all-around good guy, and I record the phone call that I make with him, as long as I'm calling from inside the state of Oregon, I'm completely legal to record that phone call without telling Josh. No beep on the line, no advance notice, no after notice either. Now, if you do it in person, in general, there's been a statute on the books that says in the state of Oregon, you can't secretly record somebody without their knowledge. Except that now the Ninth Circuit Court, the most overturned court of appeals, federal court of appeals in America, bar none, has said, no, it's actually, that's a violation of the Constitution to tell people they can't record the conversation. So because it involves legal matters, I thought we'd get Josh on the phone, and we are recording you right now, Josh, by the way. But tell me this, is that law unconstitutional? And then I know you want to say a few things about the way this is being covered by the media, because when the original charge was brought against Project Veritas, our friend James O'Keefe and company, who do undercover journalism, that the powers that be in Oregon were thrilled that a right-wing conservative journalist might be charged with the crime of illegally and illicitly recording somebody without their knowledge. And now the Ninth Circuit Court has said, nope, the whole law is unconstitutional, or has it?
That is what they've had, and what's unusual about this decision is that the heading is Project Veritas versus Mike Schmidt and Ellen Rosenblum. So this is a lawsuit actually for declaratory relief brought by James O'Keefe, who used to be associated with Project Veritas,
right. Not anymore.
Against the specific district attorney of Multnomah County in his official capacity and the attorney general. And in this case, the judge, it was a split decision. It's a 3-judge panel of a 29-judge circuit. The one judge, the presiding judge, was a Bush appointee, and the dissenting judge was an Obama appointee. But in this case, essentially what they're saying, I tend to agree with them. The scariest part of the way this law has evolved in Oregon is that essentially, and this is what Ellen Rosenblum is making clear, that it's content-based. In other words, we are going to enforce it against right-wing journalists, but not against left-wing journalists. And one of Veritas's points is, listen, we're trying to do journalism, whether you agree with them or not. I mean, they're trying to cover it. And that one of their points is, if we make it clear that we're recording, say, for Project Veritas or the National Review or the Lars Larson Show, we're likely to be physically assaulted and prevented from doing it. If, on the other hand, we're doing it for the Antifas, do you think for a moment that Mike Schmidt or the Oregon Attorney General's office would be concerned about one of those people doing it? And that's what's really at the heart of this, is that, and this is where I think the court is right, is it shouldn't matter what the content is or what the intention is. If the act essentially of recording is essentially a form of journalism, whether you agree with that journalism or not, then frankly, it doesn't matter whether you don't like the people doing it. Otherwise, you're going into a very scary area where you're essentially saying free speech is fine as long as I agree with that speech.
Okay, but let me ask you something. Should it even matter whether it's journalism? Because I'd like to see this apply to everybody. My argument has always been that the only person who gets hurt by a recording of somebody's words is the person who's lying. And I've used pedestrian examples. If you said, I'm really frustrated that, I don't know, a contractor was supposed to put a roof on my house, and you call the contractor and you say, hey, you promised to have this on by the 1st of July. It's now the 6th of July. The roof isn't done yet, and it's nowhere near done. When can I expect it to be finished? If the roofer says, yeah, I did promise by July 1, I now promise you it'll be done by the 10th, and you record his words. Well, if you ever decide to make it an issue, and a roof might involve thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, he'll say, I never told him that, or I told him that with some qualifiers. And then you say, well, here's the recording of you saying it.
Right.
The only person that hurts is the liar. And as far as I'm concerned,
right.
hurting liars is not a bad thing.
And let me be clear. I mean, journalism has taken on a much broader meaning. Obviously, we don't approve members of the press. And just because the left wing doesn't like O'Keefe or Project Veritas, they are journalists in every other sense. And in fact, one of the questions is, does somebody who runs a blog that 10 people read, are they a journalist? Yes. If you believe in free speech, it's free speech for everybody. And as you say, I mean, the one thing where Rosenblum and Schmidt, and I think this is a really scary argument, is basically saying is, well, we want to protect people from some people who are going to secretly record you. Well, of course, as you point out, secretly record you doing what? If you're doing something really wildly inappropriate or engaging in speech that's either going to result in you being charged with a crime, which is like, let's go burn down the building, or on the other hand, speech that's going to hold you up to disrepute and ridicule, some horrible, terrible, racist or hateful thing directed at somebody because of the color of their skin or what political beliefs they have, then you know what? So be it. And again, as the court observed, Oregon is an extreme outlier, which is ironic because Oregon has always claimed to be a state that cares so much about free speech, but not in this case.
And by the way, one of the examples from Veritas when O'Keefe was still there, they got recordings of people from Planned Parenthood negotiating the price of baby parts, parts of unborn babies. And they're like, well, we're not talking about buying a Ferrari. Literally, I think, or a Lamborghini. But we need $100 a head or $100 a heart, or, they were negotiating the sale of baby parts, which, as you point out, there's no way to get that kind of journalism done and to expose that kind of evil without secretly recording somebody.
Let's take that example, Lars. I happen to be generally in favor of Planned Parenthood. I generally disagree with you on this subject. But that doesn't take away from the fact that whether you agree with it or not, a journalist, whether they're Veritas or AP or Reuters, should have the ability to ask those questions. And this is truth finding. And if we basically say truth is only okay if you agree with us, then you really don't believe in the First Amendment.
And by the way, that's effectively what the fish wrapper, Therese Bottomley's paper, The Oregonian, Oregon Live, has said. It's what the Attorney General says. It's what Mike Schmidt says, right?
Yeah. Yes, and that's I went back and read some of the original stories by Hillary Baroud, a reporter for the Oregonian back in 2020, and it's just dripping with contempt and essentially saying, right-wing extremist James O'Keefe, did all these terrible things, and the Attorney General was basically fighting to protect Oregonians from this terrible man.
Josh,
flip this around for just a moment, and it would be a ludicrous argument.
Last quick question: is the law now dead at this point because of the Ninth Circuit's ruling?
One would hope, but one of the scary things that your listeners should be aware of, particularly in Oregon, is that Ellen Rosenblum, the Attorney General, has made it clear that she's going to try to get a workaround through the Oregon legislature. Now,
well, and she may get that. That's Josh Markey, the former DA. Coming up, a story about the courts and two cities and homeless people on the street. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to get to your phone calls and your emails in a moment at 866-HEY-LARS. And if you're a naysayer, we put you right to the head of the line at 866-439-5277. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. I want to tell you something. My view of government, there are people who say, Lars, you hate government. I don't hate government. It is a tool. It is to be used for a purpose, and I don't want a tool bigger for the purpose than what you actually need. So when citizens pay their taxes, and nobody actually likes paying taxes, but you expect to get services in return for the taxes that are charged. Now, that's become less and less true over the last few decades because government has grown like crazy. Government decides it does everything better than the private sector, when I would argue there are very few things that the government needs to be doing for citizens or that the government does well when it does it for citizens. And one of my most common challenges to callers, especially naysayers, and by the way, we do love naysayers, we'll put you right to that other line, is when they say, well, the government ought to do that. And I say, can you tell me anything the government does really, really well? And that usually stumps them. Sometimes they'll say, well, what about the military? They say, well, the military is made up of volunteer citizens who work for below-grade pay to be on call 24/7, 365, to be sent anywhere on the planet that America decides it's necessary to defend our national security or to fight a war and sometimes die. Those are volunteers. Their weapons almost entirely, I don't think there's a single example where the weapons are made by the government. The weapons are made by the private sector. So you've got private sector volunteers paid at below market wages for what they're being asked to do, equipped with private sector equipment, and they go and do what America asks them to do. And we thank them when they come home, and I hope we thank them for the rest of their lives. That's something government does well. Now, give me something else they do well. Do they run Amtrak well? Big loser, $1 billion a year. Postal Service loses about $5 or $10 billion a year. And you can usually point to private sector companies that do it better. But one of the things that you expect is services back. What a lot of big cities have done is accepted we're going to have semi-permanent homeless encampments throughout the cities. And I think what is especially embarrassing, I'm going to give you an example out of Seattle, because here's what's happening. Seattle, like a lot of big cities, has simply accepted that it's going to have thousands and thousands of people living on the streets. And it doesn't matter how long or how loudly the regular tax-paying, hardworking, law-abiding citizens complain about it, the city or the county will say, that's too bad. There's nothing we can do about it. The homeless people are going to stay in your neighborhood, even to the point where I talked about a story yesterday that was done by the NBC affiliate where they pointed to a woman who's trying to escape one of these homeless infected neighborhoods. You know, it's just infested with homeless people. And she can't sell her house because she says every time somebody drives up in front of her house, they take a look at the neighborhood. They don't even want to leave their car to look at the house because they're afraid their car or parts of it may be missing when they get back. It's that bad. And again, the government says, we've already got your tax money. We've already collected the money. And now when we don't provide you with services, what are you going to do? Well, in the private sector, if you go to a business to buy a product or a service and they don't deliver, number one, you say, I'm never doing business with you again. Number two, you tell, and I'm going to tell 10 of my friends never to do business with you again because you provide such lousy service. And you walk out the door. But with government, they're the only game in town. If the police and the courts and the cops and the sheriff won't clean up the mess of the homeless, then there's nothing else you can do. And it's virtually impossible to do anything on your own that won't also get you thrown in jail. So consider what's happening now. The All-Star Week, Major League Baseball's All-Star Week is coming to Seattle. And they're expecting about 400,000 people to come to Seattle. And of course, they're going to be on television. They're going to have network news crews up the kazoo. They're going to be there because of Major League Baseball's All-Star Week. And what are they going to see? They're going to see a whole bunch of homeless encampments and people shooting heroin right in public. And they're going to see people defecating on the sidewalk. And they know that the major media, and for good reason, will make great hay out of that. They'll say, hey, nice looking city, except the city looks like a trash dump. It starts to look like a third world country. Now, we used to joke. We used to laugh at countries that did this. When China or Russia or North Korea would say, we're going to clean up a particular section so that when the Olympics comes or some other big event happens, we clear all the riffraff out. Now, we know they're going to come back, but we clear them out long enough for when company comes. In some ways, on a personal level, it might remind you of back when you were in your early 20s and you had your first apartment and it looked like a giant garbage dump. I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but it certainly applied to me from time to time. And then you found out, oh, my mom and dad are coming to visit. So you take all the garbage in your apartment and you either put it in the garage or you stuff it in a closet or maybe fill large garbage bags with it, and you clean up temporarily for company when company is coming. That's what Seattle is doing right now. The same city and the same county in King County that has said, we can't do anything about the homeless. The fact that they've surrounded your kids' elementary school, the fact that your kids have to walk past drug addicts and drug dealers to be able to get to the elementary school door, we can't do anything about it until Major League Baseball comes to town. And at that point, all of a sudden, Seattle and King County gain for a short time, like some kind of superpower in a Marvel Comics personality, a Marvel Comics character. All of a sudden, you gain the superpower to clear out the homeless. And they're going to make this place look so pretty and so neat. And all the homeless, they'll be just shoved out of sight. Not because I feel sorry for most of the homeless. Most of them are there because of their own drinking and their own drugging, and they can change their circumstances anytime they decide to do it. Most of them don't do it. As Eric Johnson pointed out in that great documentary, Seattle is Dying, those homeless people are mostly there because of drug addictions that they began and that they continue. So what does Seattle do? They say, we're going to clean up temporarily. We're going to shove these people out of sight. Do you know what's happening now that's going to change things just a little bit? The homeless are apparently going to fight back. They're not right. I mean, in some cases, people who fight back are right. In this case, the homeless, the people who are driving these zombie RVs that can barely move, they're not licensed, they're not insured, they're not in good working order, they barely run. You can spot them about a mile away. They're running around handing out leaflets saying, let's fight back. Let's make the city's efforts go for naught. We're gonna refuse to be moved out of the way. I'm not saying they're right. They have no right to occupy that public property, but they're going to do it anyway. And now that the city has decided, I think the average citizens in a city like this should be angry. They should say to their city leaders, to the mayor and the city council and the county commission, they should say, you tell us you can't clean up this city every other day of the year, and all of a sudden you're going to be on national TV for Major League Baseball All-Star Week, and all of a sudden you gain the capability to be able to clean everything up, but only for a week or 10 days, and then you're going to let it go back to third world country status right after that? How dare you? I think citizens should be angry about this. Maybe if they get angry enough, and if they say, if you have the capability to clean these people up for a week when you're on national television, you can clean it up the rest of the year, or you can stop having our taxes. Glad to be with you on a Conspiracy Theory Thursday. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. If I've got a dog in the fight on this subject, it's the fact that we're on social media. I mean, we've got a presence on Twitter, on Getter, on Truth. We're on Facebook. I don't spend a lot of time myself on Facebook, but we post things there. We're on Instagram. We're on Rumble, on various other things. I don't want the government telling social media companies what to do. I think it's something the government has no business doing as they tell these social media companies to filter information, to filter out what the government, in this case the Biden administration, decides is misinformation. I don't think they know what misinformation is except when they're manufacturing it. So there's been a federal ruling against Joe Biden, and now it sounds like they might even appeal this. A federal judge ruling 2 days ago ordered the Biden administration agencies and top officials not to communicate with social media companies about certain content. That is a big win. Now, the way it's characterized by CNN is a win to GOP states. It's actually a win to American citizens to say, tell the government to stop messing around and deciding what information we get to see and what information we don't. Jessica Malusian joins me now. She's with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Jessica, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me about what your view, Competitive Enterprise Institute, CEI, what's your view of how this went down and the fact that apparently it sounds like the Biden administration plans to appeal it, saying, no, we want to be able to mess around with the social media companies.
Yeah, they are. They're definitely going to push back. And that process has already begun. But here's what this is and what isn't. This is a really good first step on the walk we all need to take about working this out, right? But I will tell you, it's going to be a difficult walk. Anytime you get into the First Amendment, it seems like it should be really clear-cut, and in some ways it is, because I think it's a principle that resonates so deeply with so many of us. But when you get down to defining what is okay and what is not okay, it's a thorny area, right? And social media is a new thing. Never before have so many Americans, wonderfully so, had so much opportunity to speak, and we want to preserve that. But if you look at the decision from this judge, it kind of shows you what the difficulties are going to be too, right? So what he does is he puts out a big list of all the things that these government agencies and some specific government employees are not allowed to do. And you're like, okay, great, that looks good. You're not allowed to pressure them. You're not allowed to threaten them. You're not allowed to get in touch with them about this or that. But then what he also does is give a list of things that the government still can reach out and say to social media companies. And those things are threats to national security, public safety, and election interference. And then you think, oh, well, you know, how you define those things, right? So if you think about the kind of the most famous example here is the Hunter's laptop.
The laptop from hell, yeah.
Yeah, the laptop from hell. You know, it turns out, we learn later, that Meta was influenced by the FBI to suppress that story. So then you think, well, of course, you know, election interference, that sounds dangerous. We don't want that going on. But then you think, okay, well, I guess that's what the FBI thought they were doing, or at least claimed they thought they were doing. So the point here is we definitely need to figure out a way to keep government out of the business of telling social media companies and threatening them and pressuring them to suppress anyone's speech.
But just talking to them is
careful.
going to be enough, isn't it, Jessica? Because if you've got Section 230 of the Communications Act that shields these companies from lawsuits, I'm subject to defamation suits, invasion of privacy suits in anything I publish, anything I say, or frankly, anything, Jessica, that you say. If you decided to defame your boss, say something you knew was untrue, and it goes on the radio, I get sued for that. You know, Twitter can't be, Facebook or Meta can't be either. So just talking to them is enough. Now, if they call up Facebook and say, hey, somebody's posted the recipe for ricin or the plans for a nuclear bomb, you say, okay, that's easy. Like you said, that's the easy part. How do they get to decide, well, having somebody say something about Hunter Biden's cocaine that he left in the library at the White House is a threat to our election security, so we're going to tell, you know, all the social media companies to stop propagating that piece of information. How do you keep them off? How does that stay off limits?
And that's you've hit exactly what the tricky question is here, right? Because one person's freedom of information impulse is another person's public safety concern. So the courts are going to have to do some work. And that's why I said, you know, this is the beginning of this very important conversation, because I think it's safe to say the pendulum swung way too far to government involvement. And I would hope most people could agree on that.
Well,
and even if you don't right now, wait till the administration flips and it's someone else's and you won't like that. So, you know, but you're right. The threat of we're going to take Section 230 away from you guys. Also, other threats like we're going to go after you social media companies, maybe in an antitrust way. All of those implicit threats make this kind of action unacceptable. But when you're dealing with a big, giant federal government, how do you prove, oh, no, we're just suggesting this to them. We're not pressuring them. You know, all of this stuff is a real gray, murky area, right? And this is what Congress, hopefully through some educational hearings and some discussion, and the courts are going to have to sort through. Where is the bright line between the government can say this, but they can't coerce this, right?
Well,
so defining what speech is what is hard, and defining where that pressure point becomes too much, where those social media companies feel like we might not survive or we'd take a huge hit to our shareholders if we don't cooperate. That's the sticky wicket.
Well, and I got to tell you, Jessica, having read a lot of the Twitter files that Musk caused to be, to be released, it seemed really clear that most of the people who either are the CEOs and the controlling people in social media companies, and an awful lot of the worker bees, folks who wrote code and did all these other things, they're politically to the left. I mean, there are very few conservatives. And so when the FBI came and said, hey, that report from the New York Post, we'll get it taken down right away. They were so anxious to do it that we don't even have to worry as much about pressure. All they have to hear is the White House doesn't like that, and they tear it down. Or they were doing it at Twitter. And so do I have a reason to suspect that even if you say we never pressured them, we never threatened them, we never said something bad might happen to Section 230, we just said, hey, we have a concern about that election story, and boom, it disappears, and everybody gets plausible deniability, don't they?
Yeah, no, and you're bringing up a point that the judge, in this decision, I think addresses that in two really interesting ways. One, it shows that there was a lot more resistance by these companies than any of us realized in the cataloging of. There was a big discovery process where all these emails and texts and all this came out. And there was a lot more pushback from these companies. I was surprised. A lot of commenters have been surprised. And then it does get closer to that sort of implicit threat of, this is a nice company you have here. Sure would be a shame if something happened to it. Then you see the fold, right? But the judge goes on to say, by the way, even if these companies would have decided that way anyway, because employees are of the left or whatever, it doesn't matter because the government still shouldn't be doing that. So he does address that. And I think that's so important, right? Because that's the point here, right?
You know what, Jessica?
The point is you shouldn't be able to do that to the left or the right.
No, you shouldn't. And you know what I think the best test would be? I think that social media companies, when they take down something major like the New York Post story, should have to justify it. And the burden should be on them. If you promise to be a platform, that's how you got Section 230 protection, then when you take stuff down, you better be able to defend taking it down. And it's on you. It's not, it's our platform, because you promised to be a platform that's agnostic. If you take stuff down, if you can't justify it, you're done.
I'll do you even one better. How about this idea? A disclosure of every government request to take down. So whenever they get, whenever Elon picks up his phone and it's the FBI, he makes it public that this has been requested. And
I would absolutely love that. That is Jessica Maluzhin. Jessica, I'm going to have to cut it off at that point, but Jessica Maluzhin is with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. We love her insights on these things. Does anybody out there really want the social media companies to get their marching orders from the Oval Office or even Capitol Hill? Back in a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show, and this segment of the show is always brought to you by NickShivers.com for an instant offer to sell your home immediately, no showing, no hassles, and you pick the closing date. NickShivers.com for details. Our Twitter poll today: should you be able to record a conversation without telling everyone involved in the conversation? My answer to that is yes. That is the same answer that the Ninth Circus Court gave, saying that Oregon's law against recording of individuals without their explicit consent is unconstitutional. It violates the First Amendment, and they need to do away with it. The question is, will the state of Oregon comply? I don't think they will. Today's Twitter poll can be found at Lars Larson Show and at LarsLarson.com. Brought to you by Ultimate Truck Services. If you rely on trucks for business, Ultimate keeps your biggest assets on the road and running right. Find them at UltimateTruckService.com. Now, we always put naysayers to the head of the line if they call. We love naysayers. 866-439-5277. Bob, if you're a naysayer, welcome to the show, and tell me what you and I disagree about today.
Hi, Lars. I'll tell you what we disagree about. Is I don't think you even realize who these homeless people are. You say that they're drug addicts or they're alcoholics, and that all they have to do is make a decision and they can get clean. Have you ever been to a homeless camp and talked to the homeless people?
Yes. I have going back. The first time I ever went to a homeless camp, an actual homeless camp, was in 1980, and it was under Interstate 5, and it was a fairly, I'm answering your question, but yes, the answer is yes. So it was a long time ago.
I don't think
40 years.
I don't think that's a legitimate yes, because that was a long time ago.
No, but I've been there. You ask, have I ever? I said that's as far back as my recollection of going to an actual homeless camp. I've been to homeless camps since then.
That.
So what's your? But what do we disagree about?
Well, I don't disagree with all the things you just said about the government. They're the ones that are putting these people out on the street. And they're the ones that are getting other people killed.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Drug addiction and alcohol.
Because they're not arresting people when they should be arrested, and they're not giving them drug counseling when they said they would.
Hold on, Bob, stop for a second. Stop. Take a breath.
Okay, I'll stop.
Take a breath.
I get nervous. Okay.
The people of Oregon have a right to make the laws of the state. They decided to make hard drugs legal. I didn't do that. The people of Oregon voted for it. I never would have voted for it.
Lars, I agree with you. They're the ones putting them out on the street.
Hold on, Bob. Let me ask you a question to test your theory.
Lars.
Bob, I want to test your theory. Would you go along with me? And I'll test the theory.
Sure.
Oregonians voted by a majority to make hard drugs legal. Now, your theory is that because they're legal, that causes people to get addicted. So I would ask you, when was the last time you shot heroin?
Oh, Jesus Christ, Lars.
No, we're not using his name in vain, but thank you anyway. You were good up to that point. Let's go to Linda in Vancouver. Hey, Linda, thanks for listening on the Radio Northwest Network. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Lars. Do I have to stay with what I told your screener, or if I go to something else?
Change your mind. You're allowed to do that. I think that's a constitutional right.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. So your last conversations, do you consider yourself a truthful person?
Yes.
Okay. Then why are you saying that, why are you calling it Hunter Biden's cocaine in
I
the
believe
library?
it is his cocaine. I believe it is his.
Proof?
No.
Do you have proof?
Yesterday, hold on, Linda.
Okay.
Yesterday when I first mentioned, Linda, listen to me for a second. Yesterday when I first mentioned, I believe it's Hunter Biden's cocaine, I said, can I prove that? And then I answered my own question, no, but I believe that both common sense and all the facts that are available to us now indicate the most likely suspect to put cocaine in the White House is Hunter Biden. Now, do you have a better one?
Last I heard, he was in recovery and he's not doing it. You have no proof that he has that's him.
Well, now you're repeating yourself and you're repeating me.
Okay.
Do I have any proof? No.
Okay.
Do I think
No.
it's likely he is the source of the cocaine? Yes, he is.
All right. So then the Republicans in the House want to investigate Biden's because they say they have some source that says he has a recording where he's bribing them. Do they have the recording? Can they find the person?
The
Why?
members of
They
that
have no
committee,
proof,
the
and yet
answer to that is yes. It sounds like you don't want a long answer.
they
The short
have
answer is yes.
They have proof.
Yes.
They have proof.
Yes.
They have
You
the
want to
report.
ask it again? Yes, yes, and yes, and yes.
They haven't admitted themselves they don't have the recording and they can't find the person.
The fact is,
the FBI has a report that this person said this.
the FBI, I want to ask you a question. You've been asking me. Do you think the FBI has covered up for the Biden crime family for some time?
No, I do not.
You don't?
Do
Okay,
you have
so
any proof that
when
they
the
have?
hold on. I get to ask a couple questions. When the FBI took into its possession in 2019, that's 4 years ago, Hunter Biden's laptop, and then the FBI lied to the public and said it's Russian disinformation. 50 retired intelligence agents signed a letter and said it's Russian disinformation, and they knew it wasn't true when they said it. That's not covering up for the Biden crime family?
I don't know about his laptop. That's not Joe Biden.
You don't
Okay,
know
that's
about his laptop? Where have you been living in a
I don't.
cave?
I don't, and I don't care about his laptop. I care about the president.
If his,
I don't care
okay,
about
let me ask you a question, quick, before we hit the break. If his laptop implicates Joe Biden in taking bribes from foreign countries, does that matter to Americans?
It matters to Americans, but do you have any proof that it does?
The laptop? Yeah, the laptop's about, even the FBI admits the laptop is real. Thank you, Linda. You were great. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and I've got one for you. If I have a dog in the fight, it's that I've never liked the minimum wage. I didn't even like the minimum wage when I earned the minimum wage. And that might sound funny because you'd say, well, you didn't like forcing an employer when you had no skills or talents and had just arrived at a job to have to pay you a minimum amount of money? No, I didn't like it then. I thought it was stupid. I said, pay me based on my talents. You know, both when my talents are good and when my talents are not so good. I think that's the honest way to do things. But of course, you hear the political left saying, we've got to have a higher minimum wage. Well, in both Oregon and Washington, there is quite a minimum wage in both states. It depends on whether you live inside of a big city or outside of a big city, especially in Oregon. But it's around $30,000 a year. If you're working at a full-time job, no overtime, you're going to make about $30,000 a year at minimum wage. And now there are cities that say, no, it's got to be even higher than that, like the city of Bellingham. I thought we'd talk about that with Mark Harmsworth, who's director of the Small Business Center at Washington Policy. Hey, Mark, welcome back to the program.
Well, thanks for having me on, Lars. It's a pleasure to be here.
I guess I'm glad to have you on, but one of my conundrums over the years has been explaining to people that when you jack up the minimum wage, but the economy doesn't cooperate with the minimum wage and with the orders of the legislature, in some cases you'll end up with very well-paid people who don't have a job. Which I know that sounds contradictory. It means, hey, buddy, your job's going, your wages are going up. Unfortunately, we can no longer afford to employ you here, but you'll make more money somewhere else when you find a job. That seems like a really dirty trick to play on people.
Well, that's exactly what happens. And if you take the restaurant or the retail industries that, particularly in the restaurant industry, where the profit they're making on food can only be 2 or 3% sometimes, maybe 4 if they're lucky. And we're talking about just regular restaurants. And then you've got somebody who's on minimum wage and the state comes in and says, okay, we're going to add, and we're like Bellingham, they're going to add $1 to the minimum wage. Then what happens is suddenly that 3% becomes 2%, becomes 1%. And the solution is either lay them off or give them less hours, because if they can't pay them less, because the state will come after them. And it puts businesses in an incredibly difficult situation. You think about Starbucks as an example, who traditionally hires a lot of kids out of school during the summer. They send them on a 2-week barista training course, and one of my own children went through this. But now Starbucks is looking at it thinking, well, I have to pay you minimum wage. Why would I invest all this money knowing within 6 weeks you're going to go back to school? You may never come back to me again, and I've just spent all this money on you. I'm just going to go hire somebody full-time at a higher rate, an individual to cover that, and all those summer jobs just disappear. So it creates all sorts of problems, and it, as Seattle has demonstrated now with one of the highest minimum wages, I think they're at $18.69 an hour right now. You're starting to put pressure again on even low middle management as well, where middle managers are starting to have people come in at wages very close to theirs. So what's the point? I mean, if you can just go get this money just for showing up to work, then and you see exactly what we're seeing in cultures today.
Well, and in fact, when you say to a business, we want you to pay, if it's $18 an hour, you're approaching $40,000 a year if you work that person full time, 40 hours a week, and no overtime at all. That if the manager at a Starbucks says, "Hey, we've got automated Starbucks," and they already do have automated McDonald's and other fast food. And previously it was too expensive to go that route, but now you're going to go that route because it's a whole lot cheaper to buy a machine over time than it is to employ a human being to do it. You're going to push a lot of people out of those starter jobs that a lot of us learned our work ethic in.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's starting to happen. And I've seen this in Europe. It's starting to happen here, where they put the kiosks in and they can reduce their employee count by 1 or 2. Suddenly you don't have all the problems that come with employees of sick leave and vacation and
sexual harassment, leave and getting injured,
and all the rest. And all the other stuff that the state imposes on you. So you start seeing that particularly. But, these businesses will start making those choices, and those jobs will be eliminated. And it can be difficult to explain that to people when they're like, wow, I'm making all this great money, but your job's about to go away. And that's exactly what happened in Seattle when they started increasing their minimum wage. And a lot of folks will say on the left, they'll say, well, minimum wage has to be a living wage. It never was designed to be a living wage. It's supposed to be to give you the ability to get some extra money or start a job or a summer job, and then your aspiration is to move into something where you can be paid more and earn more by learning a skill set. And that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be an entry into these positions, and it's being used as full-time employment, which it never was intended to be.
And Mark, this will tell you how old I am. When I first started my first radio job in 1975, so it's 48 years, it was $1.85 because that was the federal minimum wage then. Now the federal minimum wage is lower than the state minimum wage in many cases. But I remember at the time thinking, I'm getting paid and I don't have any skills to speak of at all. I mean, not in radio. And so I got to be paid while I was learning some skills. And maybe by the time I'd been there for a while, I was worth $1.85, but not a whole lot more than that at the time. And so you're telling businesses, don't teach people the profession. Don't give them a chance to show that you know what it is to work. Show up on time, do what the boss tells you to do, follow the rules, and don't get yourself in trouble other ways. You never get that. And then when you show up at your real first job, maybe after college, and you don't have the ability to show up on time or follow directions or anything else, and people wonder, where did this kid come from?
Right, and the training, the ability to have somebody come on and say to them, look, we're not going to pay you quite as much, but I'm going to pay for some college. I'm going to give you some time out. I'll put you through some training materials and train you how to do this job well, maybe even get a certification. Particularly in the industry that I came from, the computer industry, you hire folks in, you put them through what's called a CompTIA certification, and they become engineers and technicians in computers. Well, that option gets taken away from the employers. There's no incentive, similar to the Starbucks issue, to spend that money, because if you're going to make me pay full price for everything on that, I want somebody who's trained right out of the gate and who's going to show up to work on time rather than spending that time. And I think it's a crying shame, because I think it really is inhibiting the ability for a lot of the next generation that's coming up to get into new careers and new jobs and be able to train on the job. It's the apprenticeship concept,
and
they're
Mark,
taking that away.
One of the things they complain about is food deserts, where you have entire neighborhoods, usually lower income neighborhoods, where there's no grocery store. And you say, yeah, the grocery business is a 2% to 3% margin. So you've got this skinny little margin. And in a low income neighborhood, you may have an even higher problem of shoplifting and theft, or what they call shrinkage in the business. And you say, you want us to keep our grocery store open and we're operating at a loss. So then we go to automated or the self-checkout, and some people like it, some people don't like it. I mean, I tend to like it sometimes, but there are other times I don't. And you say, this is the kind of grocery store you're going to get. And if you don't like this, then we'll simply pack up and leave the neighborhood. And that has happened. It's happened in San Francisco. It's happened in Seattle. And it's going to happen in a lot more places with this jacking up of the minimum wage. Coming up in a moment, teachers' unions hold an entire state hostage to keep families away from school choice. We'll get into it next on the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to get to your phone calls and emails. I want to tell you something. I speak out against teachers' unions all the time. And I know that sometimes classroom teachers take that personally. Well, you should only take it personally if you have the attitude you belong to the union and the union tells you what to do. Now, as I always understood it, unions are groups of workers, typically. And the workers have a right to tell the union, this is how we want you to represent us, not the other way around. Now, I realize there are some union members who simply say, well, the union told me I had to do it, so I had to do it. You're forgetting they represent you, not the other way around. So what happens when an entire teachers union decides to hold a state hostage in order to keep families away from school choice? I want to tell you what happened. It just happened yesterday. And it is a tremendous deficit to every kid, to every family, to every parent out there. But let me get to the details in a moment. If you want to join the best conversation in talk journalism, it's right here every day at 866-HEY-LARS. That's 866-439-5277. And if you happen to be a naysayer, you disagree with my point of view, more than a quarter century ago, 26 years ago, we said naysayers go to the head of the line. If you've got the gumption, you got the guts or whatever intestinal fortitude it takes, I'm glad to hear your objections, but bring some facts, bring some logic, and convince me that I'm wrong about this. And you can also answer our Twitter poll. You'll find that at Lars Larson Show on Twitter and at larslarson.com. Now, about these teachers' unions. In Pennsylvania, something extraordinary was going to happen. And that is, the state of Pennsylvania was about to become, yesterday, the 8th state in America that has offered up school choice to the citizens of the state. And what I mean by that is there are a number of states that have already done it. Arizona did it last year. What they said was, if you're unhappy with the public schools, and I think there are good reasons to be unhappy with the public schools, they fail far too many students. They produce students who can't read, who can't write, who don't know much, and yet they still get a graduation certificate. And of course, the union members all get paid. So everybody's happy, right? No, they're not happy. The parents say, this is a bad result. We could do better if you'd give us not all the money that you're spending on my child, but just a portion of that money. Now, see, I don't have a direct dog in the fight because I went to public school. Tina went to public school. Our adult kids, my stepkids, went to public school. But if your kids are in school right now and you say, well, what are my alternatives? Right now, you really don't have any. The government-run schools say, we're going to take your tax money. You can send your kids to us, and we have no other options for you whatsoever. What school choice is about is saying, I would like some of the money that you're spending on my child, give it to me in the form of an education voucher. They don't just give you cash. And I'll go out and I'll find a charter school, a private school, a parochial school, an online school, whatever works best for my child, I should be able to make that choice. And I made the argument that with virtually every other government program that exists to help people out or to take care of a need, while some of those programs I could argue about whether or not they should be run the way they are, the way they're run right now, you can spend those dollars anywhere you want. If you get a Pell Grant for college, they don't tell you you can only go to a government university. You can take your Pell Grant to a private university. If you get food stamps, they don't say, but you can only spend these food stamps to buy food at a government grocery store. If you get Medicaid or Medicare, they don't say you must go to the county hospital or a hospital run by a state government. They let you spend those Medicare and Medicaid dollars at any medical institution in your state, even outside of your state. You could go right down a long list. Section 8, most Section 8 housing is private housing, but the Section 8 money comes from the government. Now, does the government say you can only spend this Section 8 money to buy or to rent housing that is provided by the government? They don't. So if it works for all those other things, shouldn't it work for education? Here are the dollars. And I think it'd stun you how much America spends on public education. Nationwide, it's around $15,000 per child per year. $15,000 per child per year. And you say, well, are they getting a good job done for that much money? And the answer is generally no. So 7 states have already said, we will give parents a portion. In the case of Arizona, I think it's $8,000 a year. And most of the parents will tell you, for $8,000, I can go and put my kid in a really top-notch private school. Now, if you want one of the elite schools, like, what's it called? There's one back in D.C. that all the presidents and the members of Congress send their kids to. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just a really good private school can be had for a portion of the money that is spent to put your kids in government schools, K through 12, the local neighborhood school. So 7 states have already done this, and there's a tidal wave coming right now. Because of the pandemic, because of the way the teachers' unions acted during the pandemic, when they said, our members still want to get their paychecks, but they don't want to go back to the classroom, a lot of parents said, then I'm taking my kid out of the schools. Millions of kids in the last 2 years have been removed from the public schools. But those parents should have a way to use some of those tax dollars that are provided for public K through 12 education. So along comes Pennsylvania. And the governor of that state is a Democrat, Josh Shapiro, and he had made it a campaign promise. And it was an unusual one coming from a Democrat because usually Democrats don't do anything that runs sideways to the unions because the unions are one of the best gifts the Democrat Party has ever had. They give a lot of money. They will say our members will vote for you. But Josh Shapiro won as governor of Pennsylvania. But one of his promises was, I'm going to provide school choice. That ended about 24 hours ago because right up to the last minute, Josh Shapiro said he was going to fulfill his promise. He was going to take $100 million of public money and provide it in something called the PASS, the PASS. It was an acronym for a program that would provide you with tax credits or vouchers or both so that you could pull your kids out of conventional public schools, failing public schools, and get the education that you wanted. It even gave parents the opportunity to have even a bigger dog in the fight because a parent could take, say, in Arizona, the $8,000 they were getting from the school system in a school voucher and add $2,000 or $3,000 to it and put their kid in whatever kind of education they want to purchase with that amount of money. Made total sense. So what happened? The Pennsylvania Democrats, they actually said, we're not going to let the entire state budget, $45.5 billion, pass unless you kill this little program. $100 million out of $45 billion, but they were going to kill the entire state budget. They were in a 5-day impasse where neither side would give in. And finally, at the end of it, Josh Shapiro, Democrat governor, you should take this into account if you believe the promises of Democrats. He had promised that he would make sure to deliver on school vouchers and school choice for parents. He caved in to the labor unions, the teachers union in particular. He caved in to his fellow Democrats, and he agreed. He said, okay, I'll go ahead. I'll kill the program. I'll put a line item veto right through that thing. I will kill it. The parents won't get it. The kids won't get it. School choice will not happen because making sure the state government had money to operate on was more important than actually delivering for parents and students, and ultimately a better job for teachers, too. Glad to get your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. Send your emails to talk@larslarson.com. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to The Lars Larson Show. I have to admit, I have family members who are in the trucking business. They drive big rigs. They drive other kinds of big trucks, CDL drivers, all of them. And then you wonder, why is it that we hear both that we are very, very short of drivers, but now it sounds like there are a whole bunch of trucking companies that are in a big bunch of trouble. Well, Mike Kucharski is owner of JKC Trucking, and I thought I'd put the question to him. Mike, welcome to the show.
Lars, thank you for having me on your show.
So tell me this. I'm hearing that we have trucking companies that are shutting their doors in the last 2 years, except that a couple of years ago I was hearing we're hundreds of thousands of truck drivers short. What's going on?
Yeah, so what we're dealing with right now is the aftershocks of COVID. When everything shut down, everybody's staying at home, people were consuming a lot of food, and we were always short drivers. Actually, consumption jumped, and we needed drivers to move the goods, move the food, and we were moving it. And it was, the volumes were up, the rates were up, so everybody was coming into the trucking industry. There was not enough drivers. And since, what's happened since then is the complete opposite. Is now that food is so expensive and goods are expensive, and obviously COVID is over, thank God. The volumes are dropping because everything is so expensive, with gasoline, you name it. I don't think I have one expense that has gone down: milk, eggs, etc. And with everything so expensive, the consumer, the American people, have to change their diet. They're buying less, and due to that, volumes are down, and that's why we have truck drivers on a standby now. Now we don't have enough work for all the drivers because the volumes have dropped.
Well, I got to ask you this, Mike. Is that a problem we need to solve, number one? And is there a way to solve it, number two? Or will the marketplace just take care of it?
The marketplace is very ruthless. It's up and down because when we needed drivers, the pricing was up, and now that the volumes are down, the freight goes to the lowest bidder, and that's not a good thing because most of our truck drivers, about 80+%, are smaller trucking companies, six trucks or less, a lot of independent owner operators, working hard to feed their family, and now they are, they're expensive. Their fixed expenses are still expensive. Their truck payment's expensive. Their plates went up. Their insurance has gone up. Fuel has skyrocketed. Fuel is really killing us because it's such a big expense. And now with the rates being so low and the volumes of work going to lowest bidder, they can't make these payments. So right now what you're seeing is carriers, to right and left going out of business because of the volumes are down and the rates are down.
So what do we do? How do you fix that?
Well, another thing that kind of caused this was we also had some bad weather. Produce season out of California started late because California got a lot of rain. A lot of fields got flooded. So that also had impact on the trucking business. We haul food product out of California. It definitely affected us. Just to give you guys an idea, this has affected every carrier across the spectrum, from one trucking operation to JKC. Even Amazon is feeling the effects of this. What we have to do is we have to regulate the pricing or help with the expenses.
Well, I know, but you know what I worry about that with, Mike? They used to have regulated airline fares, and they were crazy. because and once they let the marketplace decide, the airlines said, okay, some routes are cheaper, some are more expensive, and it all depended on supply and demand. If we start regulating, then we got the government saying, hey, if you want that load hauled, there may be a guy or gal willing to haul that load for you for $5,000, but we're going to say you have to pay $7,000. And I worry about jumping into regulatory schemes if that's where it's headed.
So maybe I used the wrong word, regulate. What we have to do is help with it, lower our costs. One thing that would really help all the drivers across America, our biggest cost right now is fuel and then driver pay. So, for a company like myself, we get a little bit more wiggle room because we're buying in bulk. And when we buy in bulk, we get a little bit of discount. But the small guy is really getting beat up at the pump. What we need to do is protect all of us, is to do something about this outrageous fuel to bring the fuel down. And because of volumes down and rates being down, we've negotiated some fuel, which is saving us, but we also had to, through COVID, we increased pay twice. JQC, I would say, was paying above average for truck drivers. But when COVID happened and the price kept going up, so us to be competitive, so our drivers wouldn't leave us, we had to increase it twice. And another precaution we had to do is cut driver pay. We did it back in May. And if the market doesn't fix itself, let's say by August, or we start making some money, we might have to cut driver pay again, because as a food provider, we need to keep the wheels rolling. Because if we go out of business, not feeding the American people, that's going to only make it even further worse for the end users, the American people, the consumer.
I'm talking to Mike Kucharski, who's owner of JKC Trucking. So let me ask you this, Mike. It won't surprise you that I think I have a solution to this, because I think, frankly, Democrats are the problem. Joe Biden in particular, and in California, Gavin Newsom are the problem. Because, number one, they've gone after owner-operators because they say you can't be self-employed anymore, which I think put California off limits to some truckers. And number two, we got a president who keeps locking up places where we could drill for oil and maybe make fuel less expensive, and throwing a bunch of new regulations on the production of oil, which also makes it more expensive. I guess I could ask you, as a trucker, would you rather have Donald Trump's diesel prices or Joe Biden's diesel prices?
Well, I would definitely, that's what I have to say, Donald Trump, because at least Donald Trump was working to keep them down, working with the people, always making the right decisions. With this administration, I've been saying since being COVID, we need to sit down with if you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever, with all the federal leaders, everybody involved, the EPA, and sit down with the trucking companies and explain our problems to them, so they could see what our problems are, so we can come up with a solution, work together, to fix this issue, because it's not going to fix itself. Right now, it's a little bit one-sided, which is not helping. We got to work together to keep the wheels rolling and the supply chain going to feed the American people.
Well, I know that if you talk to two of Joe's people, Jennifer Granholm, the energy secretary, because she has a role in it, and Pete Buttigieg, their suggestion is, Mike, go out and buy an electric truck. And you say, well, no such thing. There are a few models out there, but for the most part, they want you to drive a truck that isn't powered by gasoline or diesel. Is that even realistic right now?
You know what? There's issues with that. I'm just to give you an idea. I'm all for green energy, and I want the best for the future of my children. But electric truck is not going to fix the issue. This is brand new technology that's coming out, and it hasn't been tested yet. There's a bunch of issues. Cost, number one. To give you an example, a brand new rig, diesel-driven truck right now is about $180,000 to $200,000. These new electric trucks are going to be up to around $480,000. It's about a $300,000 increase.
Jeez.
Yeah,
that's
and
nuts.
This is the first problem. Yeah, this is the first problem. The infrastructure is not there for charging these trucks. The data and the resources of these trucks. I'm very curious, how these trucks will do in the extreme cold, extreme heat, because one way to kill a lithium battery is extreme hot and extreme cold. How will they do this? How will they do it in elevation? And the two huge issues that I see is they won't work for a long distance truck as a truck driver because of the range. Right now, my truck will fill up 300 gallons with diesel, and that will give him about 16 to 1800 mile, range before he has to refuel. Electric truck will charged for 10 hours, and the range is between 150 to 300 miles. So let's say tomorrow me and you jump in a truck and we got to go to California. We're leaving Illinois. We're not going to be able to get out of Illinois because we're going to have to recharge our batteries.
Unbelievable. That's Mike Kucharski, who's owner of JKC Trucking. Mike, it's always a pleasure. We'll have you back. I know the issue's going to stick around for a long, long time. We'll be back in a moment. You're listening to The Lars Larson Show and the Radio Northwest Network. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to get your calls. It is Conspiracy Theory Thursday, and this segment is brought to you by the home-powered generating folks at ProTech Power. Make sure your loved ones are safe when the power goes out. 541-OWN-A-GEN. Call 541-OWN-A-GEN. Our Twitter poll today, should you be able to record a conversation without telling everyone involved in the conversation and the recording? I would say yes, you should be able to make a record of that. The only person that works against is a liar. Well, there is an Oregon statute in the state of Oregon that was just heard by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the one down in San Francisco that comes out with some of the craziest stuff you've ever heard of. And they said the law in Oregon against recording without everybody knowing about the recording is unconstitutional. They've effectively thrown it out. And the decision was in favor of James O'Keefe, the man who used to be the head of Project Veritas. Veritas pushed him out the door, and that's a whole nother story, and it was wrong. O'Keefe is a great investigative reporter. In any case, he said you should be able to record without people knowing they're being recorded because it aids undercover investigative journalism. I would argue it even aids the average citizen in making sure that everybody just stays honest. But you can vote any way you like at Lars Larson Show and at LarsLarson.com. Brought to you by Ultimate Truck Services. If you rely on trucks for business, Ultimate keeps your biggest assets on the road and running right. Find them at UltimateTruckService.com. Let's go to Paul. Hey, Paul, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Hey, Lars, good to talk to you. I just want to say I'm completely on board with fighting the unions the way that they run the schools, because I don't think it's actually run by people anymore. I don't think it's run by parents. I don't think it's run by the PTA. I don't think they have any say in what goes on. It's all done by bureaucrats that sit at their ivory desks and they basically dictate to everybody else how it's going to be. But even though you're bringing information to the people about what's going on, I don't think it's quite enough. And I think the best way to actually fight the fight is to change the way that you're fighting it. And
okay.
I'm just going to give you one example.
I'm willing to listen, although I don't actually think the school board or the bureaucrats run things. I think the teachers union calls the shots. But we can argue that another day.
That's what I meant.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I meant. The unions are the one actually controlling things. The teachers don't even really have a say in it anymore, even though they're the ones that pay the fees. But what I just wanted to say to you and your viewers, and I hope they'll listen to this, is that I think the best way to fight it is to change the language by which you're attacking them, because that's exactly what you want to do. You want to be on the attack. You want to be on the offensive. And the best way to do that is to drop the language of public schools altogether. Using the word public is a misnomer. Everyone thinks that it's run by us, we have a say in it, when that's not true anymore. And I think the best way that you could fight it is to stop calling them public schools and call them what they actually are, union schools. If you use that language over and over and you get people to repeat it, it's going to have a lot of power.
I think that's valuable because I've called them both public and government schools because I tell people when we're talking about subjects like I will occasionally use the term assault weapon, but I always point out it's not my term. But if you want to say, what are we talking about? And if you were having a conversation about anything and you say, well, I'm worried about that thing in the yard. And you say, well, what thing in the yard? I could say fir tree, and you'd know exactly what I was talking about. But if I don't call it by the name you recognize it by, then we're going to have a conversation that doesn't work. So when we talk about guns, a semi-automatic sporting rifle is not an assault weapon, but we can have that discussion all day long. But I agree with you. If the people calling the shots are the labor union that represents the teachers, then they really are union schools. They're schools run by a labor union, and that's a very good point.
The government is just not a powerful enough word. There's still enough people out there that mistakenly think we run the government. We have a lot of choice in that, where we don't. It's big money, and it's also a lot of these union types, and it's also the activists that really have kind of taken over government. So calling them union schools focuses the attack where you need to fight it, and that's why I think it's such a good word.
By the way, we
can over government, over public.
We can use this on the teachers who are members of the union. And occasionally I'll get a call and they'll say, I can't teach in my classroom. It's too chaotic, or there are violent kids in the classroom. I said, get it fixed. And they say, we have no power. I said, your union is one of the single most politically powerful organizations in America, bar none. The labor union that represents teachers. I say, if your union walked in and said, we want good behavior in the classroom, and when kids get out of line or they assault a teacher, we want those kids to be, if necessary, turned over to the cops, charged with a crime if they've committed a crime. And they say, well, we can't do that. And I say, why not? Your union asks for all kinds of other things, like we'd like to stay home during the pandemic, still get our check, and not do any teaching. Okay.
Right.
The union got everything, for the most part, they got everything they wanted. And Randy Weingarten was, the number one suspect in making all that happen. So if your union walks in and says, we need well-behaved classrooms and we need consequences when a student is either acting out and ruining the education of every other kid in that room or even assaulting the teacher, we want consequence for that kid. If the teachers union demanded that, they'd get it in a heartbeat. They would.
It shouldn't even be the schools that make that call. It should be the parents. The parents should be informed, and the parents of the victim get to make that call.
I disagree. And here's why. Paul, let me tell you quickly why I disagree. If a kid assaults a teacher in the classroom, that crime has happened in an institution run by the government, run by, in theory, by the, I get what you're saying. No, but here's the thing. The parent shouldn't have to bring the cause. What happens is if one of my producers gets assaulted at work, I'd go to the radio station management and I'd call the cops, right? And you call the cops and you say, it appears this kid has committed a crime against another student or against a teacher, and we want this kid hauled down to the station house. And then you call his parents, and we'll see if the DA is wanting to charge him. And if they charge him, he should face the full consequence of the law. Paul, thanks for the call.